in the middle of a quiet airplane cabin where everyone thought that civility and respect were the norm, an 8-year-old black girl was suddenly kicked hard in the stomach by a white woman. The blow not only hurt the child, but also silenced the entire cabin. No one understood why an adult could unleash such hatred on an innocent child. But that shocking moment was only the beginning of a bigger choice: revenge or guidance, destruction or healing. If that moment happened to your child, what would you do? Would you stay calm? Would you have the strength to not turn into the worst version of yourself because of the pain? This is not just a story about a kick. It is a story about the strength of a mother, about a choice that any of us may face one day. Join me on this emotional journey. If you believe in kindness and the power of love, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue following the story. The first scream didn't sound like something that belonged in a first-class cabin. It tore through the quiet like a blade, sharp enough to make even the most absorbed business traveler look up from his laptop. People like you shouldn't even be in first class. The voice came from a woman standing in the aisle, mid-50s, dressed in crisp designer white, jaw clenched so tight the tendons in her neck stood out like ropes. Her name, though the cabin did not yet know it, was Linda Crawford. But what froze everyone was not the words alone, ugly as they were. It was who those words were aimed at. A little black girl, 9 years old, thin arms, soft braids tied with lavender beads. Her name was Ariel Brooks, and she stood there with her small hands clutched against her stomach, eyes wide as if she had done something terribly wrong. She hadn't. She had only tried to squeeze past Linda's outstretched legs to reach the bathroom. For a heartbeat. The plane seemed to stop moving. Even the hum of the engines felt muted. A moment suspended mid-air, and then it happened. Without warning, without hesitation, Linda lifted her leg and drove the sharp tip of her heel straight into Ariel's abdomen. The sound that followed was not a scream. It was a soft, broken gasp, the kind that comes when the air is punched out of a child's lungs and fear replaces it. Ariel folded in on herself, crumpling like a piece of paper. Her tiny hands flew to her stomach. Her knees buckled, and she fell. The passengers around her shot to their feet. Someone shouted. Someone else cursed under their breath. A flight attendant dropped a stack of glasses that shattered against the galley floor. But the only person who didn't move, not at first, was the woman sitting in seat 2A. Her name was Naomi Brooks, a black woman in her early 40s, CEO of a small but rising tech company, a widow, a mother, and at that moment, she remained completely still, so still the passengers nearest her held their breath, unsure whether her silence meant she was shocked or dangerous. But inside, Naomi felt something tear, something quiet, something private. A part of her that had been taught her entire life to hold herself together even when the world tried to pull her apart. Her daughter was on the floor, her child, her only child. And yet Naomi didn't scream. She didn't leap across the aisle. She didn't strike back. She inhaled once, deeply, the way she'd learned to when grief threatened to drown her after her husband died. Then she reached out and touched Ariel's shoulder with a steady, steady hand. "It's okay, baby. Mama's here." Her voice was low, warm, anchored. Ariel trembled under her touch, fighting for breath. Passengers whispered in horror. Someone pulled out a phone. Another muttered, "Jesus Christ," under their breath. But Linda astonishingly did not look sorry. She didn't even look shaken. She looked offended. "She should watch where she's going," Linda snapped, as if she were scolding a clumsy adult instead of a child she'd just assaulted. "These kids have no manners." and she pushed me. You kicked a little girl. A man in seat 3C cut in, his voice tight with disbelief. We all saw it. Linda looked around, eyes darting from face to face, as if searching for someone, anyone who would back her. But no one did. Still, her chin lifted stubbornly. She shouldn't even be here. She hissed, "First class is for people who earned it." Naomi's eyelids lowered a fraction. Not in anger, at least not the kind that explodes outward. It was the other kind. The kind that sharpens, concentrates, focuses. The kind that sits inside a person who has had to endure too many moments like this, in too many places, at too many times, and has learned through painful practice not to let the rage swallow her whole. She crouched beside her daughter, blocking out everything around her except the soft, wheezing breaths and the fear in Ariel's eyes. "Can you breathe for me, sweetheart?" "In through your nose, slowly. That's it." Her movements were gentle, methodical, every gesture precise, every breath measured, the calm of a woman who had learned long ago that losing control meant letting someone else define her. Passengers watched. Mesmerized, someone murmured. "She's handling this better than anyone I've ever seen." Linda scoffed, rolling her eyes. "That woman is overreacting. It was barely a tap. The kid is dramatic enough." The word came from Naomi, quiet, but razor sharp. She stood then not quickly, not theatrically, but with a slow, rising strength that made the hairs on the back of several necks lift. Linda opened her mouth, perhaps to insist on her version of events, but before she could speak, Naomi took one single step toward her. Not aggressive, not threatening, just steady. "You hurt my daughter," Naomi said softly, "and you think you can walk away from that." Linda blinked. Something wavered in her expression. "But you won't," Naomi continued. "Not today, not on this plane, and not ever again." Her voice carried not loud, but resonant, the kind of tone that makes people sit up straighter without realizing why. There was no rage, no shouting, no theatrical confrontation, only truth. And that truth vibrated through the cabin like a quiet thunder. A flight attendant burst forward, then Carla Ramos, short brown hair tucked behind her ears, face pale with shock. "Ma'am," she said to Naomi, "I'm so sorry. We're calling the captain. We'll handle this." Naomi nodded gently, not breaking her gaze from Linda. "We'll see," she murmured, because what no one knew not yet was that Naomi Brooks was not just a grieving widow, not just a protective mother, not just a CEO fighting her way upward in a corporate world that often tried to push her out. She was something else, someone who understood exactly how power worked, someone who had built a life on resilience, someone who had learned that when people show you who they are, you don't shout them down, you teach them. And in the next few minutes, Linda Crawford was going to learn a lesson she never expected, one she wouldn't forget for the rest of her life, and the rest of the plane. They were about to witness the start of it. 6 hours before the cabin fell silent, before the scream, before the heel, before the entire plane watched a mother decide what kind of person she would choose to be. 6 hours earlier, the day had begun in the quiet way life often feels just before it changes. In a quiet 2-story house on the west side of Atlanta, Naomi Brooks stood in the kitchen, pouring hot water into a chipped ceramic mug. The mint steam rose slowly, curling toward her face. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth settle somewhere deep in her chest. She often felt the weight of mornings like this. Not heavy, more like a memory pressed gently against her ribs. Her husband, Marcos, had once stood in this kitchen while tying his shoes, teasing her about her endless cups of herbal tea. The laughter had filled the house in a way she sometimes still expected to hear when she turned a corner. But Marcus was gone, and the house learned to echo differently. She traced her thumb along the rim of the mug, grounding herself. Today wasn't an ordinary travel day. She and her daughter were flying to Washington, D.C. for the annual memorial ceremony honoring veterans. Marcus's name had been added to the wall the previous year, and Naomi hadn't missed a ceremony yet. In the living room, Ariel hummed softly while packing crayons into a small canvas bag. The child's voice was light, drifting through the hallway, like a thread pulling Naomi toward her. Naomi walked over and leaned against the doorway, watching her daughter tuck her sketchbook between the crayons and a paperback book. Ariel loved drawing buildings, people, and animals with the focus of someone twice her age. It was the way she made sense of the world. "Ready for the flight?" Naomi asked. Ariel looked up, eyes bright. "Yes, but I don't know what snack they have in first class. I've never had a first-class snack." Naomi smiled softly. "Snacks taste the same everywhere, but the seats are bigger, so you can stretch your legs." Ariel stood from the floor and stretched dramatically, arms reaching toward the ceiling. Like this, exactly like that. Naomi helped zip the bag, her movements gentle and unhurried. She always tried to slow herself in moments like this, to be fully present. Life had taught her the value of paying attention. She lifted the bag onto a chair and brushed away a strand from Ariel's cheek. "You look just like your father when you smile," Naomi whispered. Ariel didn't fully grasp the depth of that sentence, but she pressed her cheek into Naomi's hand with a small, understanding gesture. Before they left, Naomi paused at a framed photo of Marcus wearing his uniform. Ariel kissed her fingers and touched the frame. Naomi did the same. A quiet ritual, a quiet promise. On the drive to Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, sunlight glinted across the windshield. Ariel pointed out passing landmarks in her usual curious way. Naomi kept one hand on the wheel and one hand resting lightly near her daughter, close but not confining. Her mind drifted between anticipation of the ceremony and the subtle ache of returning to a place filled with memories. She also thought about her company, Brooks Tech, which had been growing fast enough to earn media attention. A CEO who was a single black woman had become an unexpected symbol in the local business community. Naomi didn't like being treated as symbolic. She liked being seen for her work. But she also understood the responsibility that came with visibility. Her thoughts slipped into a quiet corner where the worries lived. How many times had she been dismissed in boardrooms? How often she'd spoken only to have her ideas repeated by men who received full credit? How many times she had to fight, silently, to keep her own dignity? She didn't want Ariel to carry those same battles, or at least not in the same lonely way. Inside the terminal, Naomi checked their bags and guided Ariel towards security. The lines moved slowly but predictably. An older TSA agent, a black man with gentle eyes and a salt and pepper beard, smiled at Ariel as she handed him her boarding pass with both hands. "Headed somewhere special?" he asked. Ariel lifted her chin proudly. "We're going to see my dad's name. He served the country." The agent blinked. Then his expression softened. "You must be very proud." Naomi swallowed a lump in her throat. She always felt both gratitude and grief when strangers spoke of Marcus. She nodded in silence. "Thank you for his service," the agent added, touching the brim of his cap. Ariel beamed, and Naomi whispered a quiet, "Thank you." They continued toward their gate and settled near the window. Planes taxied past like slow steel giants. Ariel pressed her palm against the glass, fogging it each time she breathed too close. "Mom," she asked quietly, "will Daddy see us? From wherever he is?" Naomi looked at her daughter. The question struck her in the familiar place where longing lives. "I think he sees you whenever your heart remembers him," she replied. "And we're remembering him today." Ariel nodded and leaned against her mother's side. Naomi put an arm around her and held her close, letting the simple closeness speak for them. As they waited, a commotion erupted near the boarding desk. A woman in white, tall, blonde hair styled in sharp waves, pointed angrily at a gate agent. Several travelers glanced over. Naomi recognized the tightly coiled frustration, the entitled gestures. People who felt they were owed something rarely concealed the belief. That woman was Linda Crawford, though Naomi did not yet know her name. She watched Linda complain about the boarding order, waving her phone for emphasis. A younger man hovered behind her, face drawn with fatigue. He carried a laptop bag and a large binder. He spoke softly to her, but she brushed him off with a flick of her hand. Ariel tugged Naomi's sleeve. "That lady looks mad." Naomi guided her gaze away. "Some people forget how to be gentle. We don't have to follow them." She meant it as a simple lesson for a child. She did not yet know the weight those words would carry later. Soon, boarding began. Naomi and Ariel walked down the jet bridge, the cool air brushing against their faces. Naomi felt her heart rate settle, as it always did when she stepped onto a plane. Flying had become a quiet space, a boundary between what had happened and what was coming. They found their seats. Ariel explored the space, touching the armrest buttons with careful fingers. Naomi savored those small expressions of joy. The cabin filled gradually. People tucked bags into overhead bins, adjusted seats, exchanged polite nods. Then Linda entered. Naomi felt, rather than saw, the shift in the cabin's energy. The woman's posture held an edge that cut the air. She inspected her seat with a look of disdain. Her assistant placed her bags overhead without a word. Naomi sensed trouble in the same instinctive way sailors sense storms. A tightening in the air, a silence beneath the noise. She reached for Ariel's hand. "Sit close to me, sweetheart." Nothing had happened yet, but part of Naomi's spirit, the part shaped by years of navigating a world where her presence was often questioned, had already begun to brace itself. She didn't know that within the hour, her instincts would be proven right. She didn't know that strangers would film what was coming. She didn't know that her strength would be tested in ways she had never imagined. All she knew in that moment was that she needed to keep her daughter safe. She did not know how difficult that would soon become. The tension that lingered in the cabin did not begin on the plane. It had been building inside Linda Crawford long before she ever stepped onto Flight 228. Hours earlier, Linda had sat at her marble kitchen counter inside her suburban Boston house, scrolling through emails with an expression that hovered between disgust and disbelief. The house was spotless, cold, beautiful, the kind of home staged for a magazine spread, where nothing looked touched, lived in, or loved. The phone buzzed with another alert. The subject line glared at her. Final foreclosure notice. Her thumb froze over the screen. For a moment she couldn't breathe. She had spent 20 years building Crawford Boutique, her luxury retail chain. She had expanded too quickly, bought stores in markets she didn't understand, leveraged everything she owned to keep the image of success polished and bright. She had lived as if failure could never touch her, but failure had touched her. It had wrapped its fingers around her wrists and dragged her toward a truth she refused to accept. Someone else might have cried. Someone else might have felt fear. Linda felt rage. She hurled her phone across the pristine kitchen. It bounced against a leather chair and landed on the glossy floor. She cursed under her breath. A minute later, she picked it up, her hand shaking, and saw that the email still glowed on the screen. The problem had not vanished just because she wanted it to. She needed a distraction. She needed to remind herself she still held power somewhere. That was when she called her assistant. Dylan Moore arrived 20 minutes later. Tie askew, hair slightly damp as if he had rushed from his apartment without finishing his morning routine. He carried a large binder filled with paperwork he hoped might soften the blow of another bad financial week. He stepped into Linda's kitchen and gave a stiff smile. "I brought the documents you requested." Linda didn't respond. She stared out the window at the immaculate lawn, her lips pressed into a thin line. Dylan waited, awkward and unsure. He had worked for Linda for almost 2 years. In that time, he had learned how quickly she shifted from cool to cutting. His job was to anticipate her mood, absorb her anger, and stay employed. Her company paid poorly, but he had student loans he couldn't ignore. Without turning, Linda spoke. "Did you book the tickets?" "Yes," Dylan replied. "Boston to Atlanta. First class. Your preferred seat is confirmed." The silence stretched again. Dylan swallowed. "Is everything all right?" he asked quietly. Her head snapped toward him, eyes burning. "Do I look all right?" He looked away, murmuring, "Sorry." Linda grabbed her coat and purse. She wanted out of that house, out of that email, out of the version of herself that seemed to be crumbling. She left without another word. Dylan followed like a shadow. The airport only amplified her frustration. People shuffled slowly. Families filled the walkways. Lines formed everywhere she looked. She felt the world closing in, refusing to give her space. By the time she reached the gate, her temper had risen in thick, suffocating waves. When the gate agent asked her to wait for pre-boarding, she snapped. Words cut out of her like sharp stones. "You people are incompetent. Do you have any idea who I am?" Passengers turned their heads. The gate agent stiffened. Dylan tried, timidly, to calm her, but Linda swatted his words away like gnats she didn't care to hear. A few minutes later, when she saw a mother and young girl sitting near the window, she felt an unexpected heat in her chest. She did not know Naomi and Ariel. She did not know their story. But she saw the closeness between them, the effortless trust in the child's posture, the tender way the mother tucked hair behind her little girl's ear. It stirred something in her, something uncomfortable, something she did not want to examine. Linda boarded early and took her seat in first class. She inspected the upholstery, the tray table, the seatbelt latch. She complained quietly about the lighting, about the temperature. Dylan placed her bags overhead. He looked exhausted. Naomi and Ariel boarded soon after. Linda glanced at them as they moved through the aisle. The resentment returned almost immediately, sharp and bitter. She didn't know where it started. She didn't know why it burned. But she fed it because feeding it was easier than acknowledging the fear sitting underneath. She watched the child settle into the seat behind her. She watched the mother adjust the blanket and help her daughter fasten her belt. Something twisted in Linda's stomach. A memory she never invited surfaced without warning. A younger version of herself standing in a living room decorated with expensive furniture she wasn't allowed to touch. Her mother yelling because Linda had spilled a cup of juice. Her father telling her to stop crying because crying was weak. A sharp slap on her wrist. A feeling that she needed to be perfect or be punished. A childhood with no softness, no forgiveness, no gentle hands to guide her. She blinked hard, pushing the memory down until it disappeared beneath the practiced armor she wore each day. She looked at Naomi again. Beautiful, composed, effortlessly steady. Linda told herself she disliked the woman because she seemed privileged, because she was calm, because she sat there with a confidence Linda had never learned. In truth, Naomi represented everything Linda had lost or never had: stability, respect, control over her life. Naomi had built something real. Linda had simply built a facade. The plane began taxiing and Linda opened her phone, scanning emails she already knew would ruin her mood further. She gripped the armrest with frustration. Dylan tried to focus on his spreadsheet, but Linda's breathing grew louder and more erratic. She muttered complaints under her breath. First class isn't what it used to be. Anyone can buy a ticket now. Standards are collapsing. Her bitterness seeped into the air around her. The moment Ariel accidentally bumped the back of Linda's seat while placing her bag overhead, Linda turned with a glare so sharp it might have sliced glass. She saw a child. But she did not see innocence. She saw chaos. She saw offense. She saw something to control. "Watch it," she hissed. Ariel shrank back. Naomi apologized softly, yet firmly. The tone was so composed it infuriated Linda more. She wanted someone else to break with her. She wanted the world to feel as chaotic as she felt. In that moment, Linda believed she was defending respect. In truth, she was defending the last fragile pieces of her pride. She didn't know yet that the pressure inside her was climbing towards something devastating. She didn't know that her fury would soon strike the wrong target. And she didn't know that the woman behind her, the one she judged so easily, was far stronger than she realized. This simmer inside Linda would soon boil over. And when it did, she would cross a line from which there was no easy return. The airport carried the kind of energy Naomi always noticed, but rarely allowed to overwhelm her. People moved with rolling suitcases, drifting conversations, announcements echoing overhead. There was a rhythm in it, a steady pulse of travelers crossing paths for a moment and disappearing again. Naomi held Ariel's hand as they walked past the security checkpoint. The child swung her arm gently, not from restlessness, but from simple contentment. Naomi glanced down at her daughter's face and felt a small warmth rise inside her. She cherished these quiet details, the ones that reminded her of life's softer corners. They found their gate early, giving themselves time to breathe before boarding. Naomi chose 2 empty seats beside a wide window. Ariel immediately pressed both palms to the glass, fascinated by planes drifting across the tarmac like distant giants. "Do you think our plane is as big as that one?" Ariel asked. "It's about the same size," Naomi answered, setting her bag at her feet. "But the cabin might feel different once we're inside." Ariel nodded, absorbing the information the way she always did, thoughtful and curious. She traced small shapes on the glass with her fingertip. Naomi admired her daughter's ability to turn simple things into moments of wonder. Across the waiting area, a cluster of business travelers surrounded an outlet station, typing rapidly, their faces dull with fatigue. Families juggled backpacks and snacks. An older couple sat reading newspapers. The familiar ordinariness of it all grounded Naomi. A tall woman in a Navy uniform approached, carrying a stack of laminated cards. Her name tag read, Officer Thompson. She was part of the airport's passenger assistance program. She stopped near Naomi and offered a polite smile. "Hello. Are you traveling today with your daughter alone?" Naomi nodded. "Yes, just the 2 of us. If you need any help getting settled, feel free to flag me. It can get hectic." "Thank you," Naomi replied. The woman's kindness reminded her of how Marcus used to stop to greet service members whenever they traveled together. His respect for people had always been genuine, never performative. Naomi felt a small tug of memory and inhaled slowly. Officer Thompson looked down at Ariel. "Big trip today," Ariel answered softly. "We're going to see where Daddy's name is." The officer paused, her gaze gentle. "That's an important trip," she said. "I hope it brings you peace." Ariel offered a small smile. Naomi whispered a quiet, "Thank you once more." When the officer walked away, Naomi noticed a figure pacing near the gate counter. The posture was unmistakably tense. It was the same woman she had glimpsed earlier, Linda Crawford. Linda's voice carried just enough for nearby passengers to hear. Her expression was sharp, almost brittle. The gate agent tried to explain something, but Linda spoke over him, pointing at the boarding sign as if she could bend the process to her will. Dylan stood behind her with his head lowered, flipping through his binder again and again, although he wasn't reading anything. Every so often he glanced around the terminal with an apologetic look. His shoulders seemed too small to carry the pressure resting on them. Naomi redirected her attention to Ariel. She didn't want to assume anything about a stranger's behavior. She knew too well how easily stress twisted people. But there was something about the way Linda moved, quick, clipped, full of friction, that made Naomi quietly wary. Ariel tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, do people yell at airports a lot?" "Sometimes," Naomi replied gently. "Travel can bring out sides of people they don't always realize they have." Ariel processed the answer, then rested her head on Naomi's shoulder. Naomi smoothed a hand along her daughter's back. She hoped the day would stay calm. She hoped the ceremony for Marcus would offer Ariel a sense of connection. She hoped for a quiet flight. A subtle announcement invited passengers to begin lining up. Naomi stood, adjusting the strap of her carry bag. She guided Ariel toward the gate, keeping her steps unhurried. As they waited in line, Naomi caught a glimpse of the large memorial brochure tucked inside her bag. A photograph of the white headstones in perfect rows stared back at her. She touched the edge of the paper, almost absently. Those rows had changed her life. They had shaped her grief into something steady, something that kept her anchored on days when the world pulled at her edges. Ariel slipped her hand into hers again. Naomi squeezed gently. Soon their row was called. They walked through the jet bridge, the cool air brushing across their faces. Ariel inhaled deeply, letting the newness of the moment wash over her. Inside the plane, soft lighting pooled along the aisle. The scent of clean leather lingered. Naomi found their seats and settled in. Ariel examined the buttons on her armrest with fascination, then turned her face toward the window as if she could see the horizon already. Passengers filtered in. The sounds were soft, a mix of hushed conversations and seatbelts clicking into place. Then Linda stepped inside. Her heels struck the floor with a rhythm that felt sharper than any sound had a right to be. She paused at her seat and surveyed the cabin as though it were a stage she had not approved. Dylan followed, carrying her coat and two bags stacked on top of each other. Linda lowered herself into her seat with visible irritation. Dylan placed the bags above her and murmured an update about a meeting scheduled later in the week. She brushed him aside, barely listening. Naomi kept her gaze steady, offering no challenge, no judgment. She simply observed. There were people whose pain bled inward, and those whose pain lashed outward. Naomi sensed which type Linda was. Ariel leaned close and whispered, "She looks like she needs a hug." Naomi looked at her daughter with quiet affection. "Some people don't know what to do with hugs, sweetheart." Ariel nodded, although she didn't fully understand. Her innocence reminded Naomi of how much she still needed to protect, how much of the world she needed to filter before it reached her daughter. The flight attendants continued their preparations. Carla Ramos greeted passengers with practiced warmth. When she reached Naomi's row, she paused. "Let me know if you need anything at all," she said softly, noticing Ariel's shy smile. "We will," Naomi replied. Carla continued down the aisle. Naomi adjusted the small blanket over Ariel and checked the seat pocket in front of her. Everything felt orderly, calm, predictable. But beneath that calm, Naomi sensed a fragile balance. She couldn't explain it. It was the same intuition she carried into boardrooms when she sensed conversations turning. The same instinct she felt walking late at night on unfamiliar streets. A whisper deep in her chest, telling her she should stay aware. She glanced toward Linda, who scrolled through her phone with growing agitation. There was a hardness in her jaw, a hollowness beneath her eyes. Something frayed. Naomi turned her gaze back to her daughter. Whatever the flight held, she silently promised herself one thing. Ariel would be safe. Ariel would feel loved. Ariel would not inherit the bitter weight of the world. But in the hours ahead, Naomi would learn that protecting a child sometimes requires more than calm words and steady hands. Sometimes it forces a mother to face a truth she'd rather avoid. Not everyone wants peace, and even the gentlest hearts may be tested by those who have forgotten kindness. The cabin lights settled into a soft glow as the last few passengers took their seats. The air carried a calm hum, the familiar blend of anticipation and quiet conversations. Naomi fastened her seatbelt and glanced at Ariel, who sat with her legs tucked close, gazing at the neatly folded safety card. The child liked to study every tiny picture, as if the symbols held secrets she needed to understand. The overhead bins closed with small thuds along the aisle. Carla Ramos walked through to check latches, her movements practiced and reassuring. Naomi offered her a nod of thanks as she passed. Ariel lifted the corner of her blanket, forming a little tent over her hands. Moments like this always softened Naomi's heart. The safety demonstration began. While most passengers listened with half attention, Ariel followed every gesture. Naomi smiled at the small concentration on her daughter's face. She took a slow breath, letting the steadiness of the moment settle inside her. The plane began taxiing. Wheels rumbled softly beneath them. Naomi touched Ariel's hand, not because the child was nervous, but because she cherished the simple connection. Ariel's fingers curled around hers with the trust only a child could offer without hesitation. The aircraft lifted from the ground, rising smoothly. A few passengers murmured their relief. Naomi felt a familiar pull in her chest, the same sensation she always had at takeoff. A brief weightlessness that reminded her how small everything looked from above. As the plane leveled into its climb, Naomi helped Ariel adjust her backpack near her feet. It had shifted during takeoff. Ariel leaned forward to reposition it, stretching carefully, wanting to be helpful. She nudged the bag a little farther under the seat, then reached up to push her water bottle deeper into the pocket behind her tray table. In that moment, her elbow brushed lightly against the back of the seat in front of her. A soft tap, barely noticeable, a moment too ordinary to even acknowledge, if the person sitting there had been anyone else. But it was Linda. The reaction came so quickly, it felt like a thread snapping. Linda turned her head, eyes narrowing with a sharpness that made Ariel freeze. The woman's voice cracked through the quiet cabin. "Control yourself." The words weren't loud, but they were tight, clipped, and meant to wound. Naomi felt Ariel's small body stiffen beside her. The child lowered her arm immediately, her movements shrinking, as if she feared her own hands. Naomi straightened in her seat. Her voice remained calm, but the steadiness carried weight. "She didn't mean to disturb you. It was unintentional." Linda turned fully now, her gaze sweeping over Naomi with the kind of disdain usually reserved for things someone wanted removed. Maybe you should teach her how to sit properly. A few passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. Carla, further down the aisle, glanced up but continued checking her list. She hadn't heard enough to intervene. Naomi held Linda's gaze for a moment, not in confrontation, but in clarity. She's a child. She's doing her best. Linda's expression tightened, her jaw clenching in a way that revealed something deeper than irritation. Naomi sensed the tension rising, the kind that had little to do with a gentle bump on a seat and everything to do with something brittle inside the woman. Ariel whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." Her voice trembled. Naomi tucked a curl behind her daughter's ear. "You did nothing wrong." Linda clicked her tongue, muttering something under her breath. Her hands moved sharply as she lifted her phone again, checking messages that only seemed to heighten her agitation. The seatbelt sign beeped. The light flicked off. Carla appeared with her service cart, brightening as she reached their row. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked Ariel first, her tone feather light. Ariel hesitated. Still shaken. Naomi encouraged her gently. "Go ahead. Can I have apple juice?" "Of course," Carla said. She poured it carefully, placing the small cup on Ariel's tray. Ariel wrapped both hands around it, seeking comfort in the warmth of something familiar. Naomi ordered sparkling water and took a slow sip. Meanwhile, Linda frowned at her phone, scrolling as if each new email confirmed some private disaster. Dylan sat motionless beside her, avoiding eye contact with everyone. His fingers twitched near his binder, but he kept them folded in his lap, afraid even to breathe incorrectly. Linda suddenly reached for her designer handbag, tugging it out from under the seat with a sharp movement. She placed it beside her leg, its metal clasps glinting in the cabin light. Ariel took a careful sip of her juice. She held the cup with both hands, concentrating on not spilling a drop. Naomi watched her with a tender smile. A slight bump of turbulence rolled through the cabin. The plane swayed gently. The juice rippled in the cup, and a few drops slid over the edge, falling in a slow arc toward the floor. Naomi noticed immediately. "That's all right," she started to say, reaching for a napkin, but the bag sitting by Linda's leg caught two small drops, barely noticeable unless someone stared directly at it. Linda noticed. Her intake of breath was sharp enough to break glass. She snatched the handbag off the floor. Unbelievable. A cluster of passengers turned to look. Dylan stiffened. Linda held the bag toward Naomi as though it were contaminated. "This cost $2,000. $2,000? Naomi kept her posture steady. "I'll wipe it off. It's just a little juice." "No," Linda hissed. "Your child is out of control." Ariel's face folded in on itself, fear mixing with embarrassment. The child whispered apologies in a soft loop. Naomi placed an arm around her shoulders, shielding her gently. "She didn't spill it on purpose," Naomi said quietly. Linda leaned closer, eyes burning with frustration that came from somewhere far deeper than a drop of juice. "Some people do not belong up here. I paid for peace, not chaos." The insult hovered in the air long enough for several passengers to hear it. A man in row 3 looked sharply toward Naomi, then back at Linda, disbelief etched across his face. Naomi breathed through her chest, slow and controlled. She refused to let anger take shape. Not yet. Not in front of Ariel. She met Linda's stare, calm but unyielding. "No one deserves to be spoken to that way," she said. Linda scoffed, turning forward abruptly, gripping her bag like a shield. Ariel trembled against Naomi's side. The child leaned into her mother's shoulder, hiding her face. Naomi kissed the top of her head, whispering reassurance so gently it blended with the low hum of the engine. Carla approached again, noticing the tension now settling like fog. "Is everything all right here?" she asked. Voice careful. Linda pressed her lips into a hard line. "Everything is fine," she said too quickly. But the cabin had shifted. The ease from earlier had evaporated. Naomi felt the weight of an unseen storm gathering. Inside her chest, a door began to close, quietly, decisively. She didn't know what would come next, only that her daughter's dignity mattered more than anything else, and she would protect that dignity, no matter what line someone else chose to cross. The atmosphere inside the cabin shifted the way air changes before a storm. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just a tightening, subtle but unmistakable. Naomi felt it in the way Ariel pressed closer to her, in the uneasy glances of passengers who sensed trouble but weren't sure where it would break open. Carla moved a few rows back with her service cart. Though she kept a watchful eye toward Naomi's section, the child still held the edge of her blanket, twisting it unconsciously, her shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. Naomi rested a calming hand along her daughter's arm. "You're all right?" she murmured. Ariel nodded, but the tension in her fingers didn't ease. Up ahead, Linda adjusted her seat with an abrupt motion, tugging at the fabric of her sleeve as though the world were poking at her from every direction. She opened her handbag, dabbed at a spot that no longer existed, then examined the leather with a severity reserved for far greater tragedies. Dylan sat rigid beside her. His knees were drawn close, his laptop unopened. He stared straight ahead, his expression tight, as if he hoped invisibility might save him from whatever Linda's mood might turn into next. The aircraft steadied after a soft pocket of turbulence. A few passengers resumed their conversations, but the uneasy quiet around Linda's row remained. Ariel lifted her cup to take another sip, more cautious this time. Naomi gently steadied the tray with her hand, just in case the plane jolted again. Once the juice was set down, Naomi leaned close to her daughter. "You did everything right," she whispered. "Don't take her words into your heart." Ariel's eyes glistened. She looked at me like I was trouble. "You're not," Naomi said. "You're good. You're kind. That matters more than anything." Ariel nodded slowly, though Naomi sensed the deep sting still settling beneath the child's ribs. Linda suddenly exhaled with irritation, as if the very act of being surrounded by other human beings offended her. She twisted in her seat, glancing back with a glare sharp enough to cut air. "That noise!" she snapped. "Make her stop fidgeting. I'm trying to work." Naomi straightened. "She's not making noise. She's sitting quietly." Linda scoffed. "Everyone can hear her moving. It's distracting." Ariel shrank back, pulling her arms against her chest. Naomi felt something in her tighten, a boundary being tested 1 inch too far. Before she could respond, the cabin lights flickered briefly as the aircraft adjusted altitude. Carla made her way forward again, pausing by their row. "Just checking in," she said softly, her eyes flicking with concern toward Ariel. "Can I get you anything else?" Naomi shook her head. "Thank you. We're fine." Carla lingered for a breath, sensing the heaviness of the space, then continued down the aisle. Linda saw Carla's concern and scoffed under her breath. Some people get far too much sympathy. Naomi inhaled, slow and steady. She kept her voice quiet but firm. "Please stop speaking about us." Linda twisted in her seat again, meeting Naomi's eyes with a cold stare. "This is first class. It's supposed to be peaceful. If you can't keep your daughter under control, maybe you should have booked somewhere else." The insult sliced deeper this time. Ariel's breath hitched. Naomi cupped her daughter's cheek, gently wiping away a tear that had begun to fall. The child whispered, "Mom, I didn't mean to bother anyone." "I know," Naomi whispered back. "You haven't bothered anyone." But Linda had struck her target. Naomi wasn't offended on her own behalf. She was furious because a woman who knew nothing about her daughter had dared to speak as if the child's very presence was an inconvenience. A few passengers nearby began watching more openly now. A man in seat 3B leaned slightly forward, frowning. A woman in 4A pulled out her phone slowly, unsure if she would need it, but preparing just in case. Naomi took another breath, holding her composure with deliberate control. She had sat through hostile boardrooms, had listened to executives speak to her as if she were invisible, had taught herself to win arguments without raising her voice. She understood pressure. She understood restraint, but she also understood limits. Beside her, Ariel whispered again, "Mom, can I go to the bathroom?" Naomi smiled gently. "Of course." She unbuckled their seatbelts and guided Ariel into the aisle. The bathroom was near the front, just past Linda's row. Naomi's hand remained steady on her daughter's back as they approached. Linda saw them coming, and something shifted in her eyes. A dark flicker, a quick tightening, a decision made in the space of a heartbeat. She extended her leg across the narrow aisle, not casually, not accidentally, with intention. Ariel paused, confused. Naomi's voice remained collected. "Excuse us." Linda didn't move. "You can go around," she said coolly. Naomi's chest tightened. "Please move your leg." Linda returned her attention to her phone, pretending not to hear. Ariel hesitated. She moved sideways, trying to squeeze through the narrow gap. It happened in a blink. Linda's heel jerked upward in a quick, cruel motion. Sharp contact, a small gasp, a soft, broken sound that pierced the air. Ariel folded forward, clutching her stomach. Her breath vanished. The world around her blurred. Naomi caught her instantly, kneeling in the aisle as instinct overtook everything else. The child trembled in her arms. The pain radiated through her small frame. Passengers gasped. Someone covered their mouth. A man stood abruptly, disbelief painted across his face. Carla rushed forward, eyes wide. What happened? Linda was already raising her voice. She tripped. "She ran into me." "She didn't run," Naomi said, her voice low and unwavering. "You kicked her." The cabin fell into a stunned silence. No one blinked. No one breathed. No one knew what to do, except Naomi. Her hands moved with controlled precision, checking Ariel's abdomen for tenderness, searching for signs of deeper injury. The child whimpered softly, leaning into her mother's chest. "It hurts," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart," Naomi murmured, holding her close. "I'm here." Carla crouched beside them. "Do you want us to call for medical assistance?" "Not yet," Naomi said. "Still assessing." She turned her gaze up to Carla. "Steady and absolute. But we will need to document everything." Passengers murmured in agreement. Linda looked around, suddenly realizing the story she tried to push wasn't being believed. Not by anyone, not even by Dylan, whose face had gone pale as paper. Naomi rose slowly, lifting Ariel with her. The entire cabin watched. Naomi's voice remained calm, but a quiet fire ran beneath every word. "This isn't over." The line was not shouted. It was not dramatic. It was a promise. And for the first time, Linda looked afraid. The cabin held a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself had thickened. Naomi still knelt in the aisle with Ariel cradled against her chest, one arm supporting the child, the other assessing the tight muscles around her abdomen. Every motion Naomi made was precise, controlled, grounded in a calm strength that grew sharper when her daughter was in pain. Ariel breathed in short, shaky bursts. Her small fingers clutched the front of Naomi's shirt, as if holding on to something steady might keep the fear from spilling out. Naomi whispered close to her ear, "You're safe. Stay with me. I'm here." Carla crouched nearby, hands trembling slightly as she held a first aid kit she had grabbed from the galley. Behind her, passengers leaned into the aisle, forming a half circle of horrified witnesses. A man in seat 3B finally found his voice. "I saw it. She kicked the girl. That was deliberate." His words rippled through the cabin like a spark catching dry grass. A woman 2 rows back added, "She was blocking the aisle on purpose before that. I saw the whole thing." Linda snapped around, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're all exaggerating." She stumbled. Children are careless. They bump into everything. Dylan lowered his gaze, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Shame carved lines across his face. He pressed his hands together, breathing shallowly. Naomi lifted her chin and studied Linda with a steadiness that made the woman flinch. "You hurt my daughter." "She lunged into me," Linda insisted. "Don't twist the story." Passengers exchanged looks. Someone in the far row unlocked their phone. Another lifted a device higher, thumb hovering above the record button. A quiet murmur of disapproval spread among the seatbacks. Naomi noticed, not for validation, but for clarity. People had seen. People had heard. Her daughter would not drown in the shadows of someone else's lies. Naomi refocused on Ariel. The child's breathing eased slightly, though pain lingered in the crease between her eyebrows. Naomi pressed gently around the tender spot again, checking for deeper injury. Ariel winced, but didn't cry out. "Good girl," Naomi whispered. "Tell me exactly where it hurts." Ariel tapped a small area near her ribs. Naomi nodded, storing the information, analyzing possibilities the way she would during medical crises at home or in her company's wellness initiatives. It steadied her, this instinct to diagnose, to protect. Carla looked to Naomi. "Should I alert the captain?" "Not yet," Naomi answered. "Let her recover a moment." But a voice from the aisle spoke before Carla could move. It belonged to an older gentleman with broad shoulders and a calm authority. "You should alert him," he said firmly. "Assault on a minor is serious." Linda spun toward him. "Assault?" "That's absurd, ma'am. I saw everything," he replied. "Your heel went straight into her stomach." Carla hesitated only a heartbeat before signaling to a colleague. "I'll notify the cockpit." Linda's voice rose an octave. "You can't be serious. I'm the one who was inconvenienced." "I'm the one," an elderly woman in foray interrupted sharply. "You're the one who kicked a child." Linda's jaw dropped. "You're all turning against me. This is ridiculous." The woman did not waver. "Honey, if you don't want people turning against you, maybe don't kick kids." A soft ripple of agreement traveled through the cabin. Dylan shifted uncomfortably. His fingers fumbled at the binder on his lap. He looked toward Linda as if debating whether loyalty was worth what he had just witnessed. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Linda, I don't think lying will help," Linda snapped. "Be quiet. You work for me." It was the wrong sentence to say in front of that crowd. Dylan's face reddened. Something inside him bent, then straightened. He looked toward Naomi and whispered, "I'm so sorry. She's not well." Naomi didn't reply. Her attention remained on Ariel, but she registered Dylan's words, the tremor in them, the guilt building behind his eyes. She sensed he was struggling with more than this single moment. The aisle remained blocked by anxious passengers trying to offer help. One woman passed forward her jacket, offering it as padding. Another man leaned down and whispered encouragement to Ariel, his voice gentle and reassuring. Naomi accepted the kindness without letting it overwhelm her. She stayed rooted in the task at hand. "Does it hurt when you breathe?" she asked quietly. "A little," Ariel whispered. "Let me listen." Naomi placed her ear near her daughter's ribs, monitoring her breaths, the depth, the rhythm. The girl's lungs sounded clear. No wheezing, no acute distress. Relief moved through Naomi in a slow exhale. When Ariel finally opened her eyes fully, she whispered, "I didn't want anyone to get mad." Naomi kissed her forehead, a long, grounding touch. "You didn't do anything wrong? Not one thing. Across the aisle." A younger man holding a phone raised his hand timidly. "I recorded the moment she kicked her. I didn't mean to intrude, but I thought you might need it." Naomi looked at him. Her voice carried gratitude without embellishment. "Thank you for being brave enough to film it." Hesitation flickered in his eyes. "I just didn't want the truth to get lost." Linda let out a sharp laugh. "So now strangers are spying on me. That's unlawful." "No," Naomi said calmly. "It's accountability." Linda's face reddened. At that moment, Carla returned with urgency in her step. "The captain is aware. He wants everyone to stay seated until further notice. Authorities will meet the aircraft when we land." The announcement traveled through the cabin like a cold wind. Linda recoiled. "Authorities? What authorities? This is unbelievable. You can't involve them. There's nothing to involve." But even as she spoke, her voice lacked the same confidence. Panic seeped into the edges. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the handle of her bag. The mask she wore, the polished exterior, the rigid entitlement began cracking. Naomi lifted Ariel carefully, supporting her back. Carla cleared space for Naomi to return to her seat. Several passengers reached out instinctively, steadying the aisle as Naomi moved. Once settled, Naomi positioned Ariel gently against her side. The child leaned into her mother's shoulder, comfort returning in small, cautious breaths. Carla knelt beside them. "Do you need anything else?" Naomi shook her head. "Just a quiet moment for her." Passengers nodded in agreement, as if silently promising that no more harm would come her way. Linda stared at the back of her seat, knuckles white around her phone. She whispered something to herself, something sharp and self-protective, but no one leaned close enough to hear. Naomi could sense the cabin watching her now, not out of curiosity, out of respect, out of a shared understanding that what they had witnessed wasn't an accident or misunderstanding. It was cruelty born of something deeper, and it had found the wrong child. Naomi closed her eyes for a brief moment. She held Ariel's hand and breathed in with intention. She didn't want rage to settle in her chest. She wanted clarity, strength, purpose. When she opened her eyes again, there was a stillness in her expression, a promise forming quietly, a promise that what happened would be answered in full measure. Linda must have felt that shift. She glanced back once, quickly, then faced forward again, her shoulders growing tense. She sensed something had begun, something she could no longer control, something carried not by anger, but by truth. For several minutes, the cabin existed in a fragile quiet. Naomi held Ariel close, her hand resting gently across the child's ribs while monitoring each breath. Ariel had stopped trembling, though the lingering ache in her abdomen showed in the way she leaned into her mother, seeking the warmth she always trusted. Passengers remained alert, their eyes darting between Naomi and Linda as though unsure which moment they should prepare for next. Carla stayed nearby, hovering with the first aid kit held lightly against her hip. The flight's hum returned, but beneath it lay a current of tension that refused to settle. Linda stared ahead with her jaw locked tight. She clutched her handbag as though someone might steal it. Sweat gathered along her hairline. Each time a passenger whispered, her shoulders jolted slightly, as if she expected condemnation to strike like a thrown stone. Naomi finally smoothed Ariel's hair, her touch steady. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "tell me if the pain changes. It hurts a little, but not the sharp way anymore." Ariel answered softly, "Just sore." "That's good," Naomi murmured. "Your breathing sounds steady." The child nestled her cheek into Naomi's arm. "Stay with me." "I'm right here," Naomi replied, brushing her thumb along Ariel's eyebrow. "I'm not going anywhere." Only after making sure her daughter was stable did Naomi lift her head. Something in her expression shifted. It was not anger. It was clarity deep enough to still the air. She reached slowly into her carry bag and retrieved her phone. The movement was calm, deliberate, lacking any dramatic flourish. Yet an unmistakable ripple passed through the cabin. People sensed that something meaningful was beginning. Naomi unlocked the device, scrolled briefly, then pressed one contact. Her voice dropped to a quiet register, the kind used by those who lead companies, raise children, and make decisions with the same unwavering steadiness. "Eli," she said when the call connected, "I need you." Passengers glanced toward each other. A few leaned closer without meaning to. The name seemed familiar, though they couldn't place it yet. A pause followed. Then Naomi continued in the same quiet tone. "I need the team on standby. There was an incident in the cabin. My daughter was injured by a passenger." Another pause. Naomi listened, eyes steady. "No," she said softly. "I'm not hurt." But Ariel is shaken. Her fingers traced gentle circles across her daughter's shoulder. "Yes. Send the standard documentation request. I want to prepare a formal report when we land." Linda's head whipped around. "Who are you calling? Why are you involving people?" Naomi didn't acknowledge her. She spoke into the phone with the calm of someone who made decisions under pressure every day. "And Eli," she added, "contact the airline's legal department. They'll want to review footage. I'm assuming there are multiple recordings from passengers." She glanced briefly toward the man who had recorded earlier. He nodded subtly, confirming her suspicion. Linda sputtered, "Legal. Are you threatening me?" Naomi still did not speak to her. She listened again to the voice on the other end. Whatever Eli said, it brought the faintest softness to Naomi's eyes. "Thank you," she murmured. "Yes. I'll keep you updated after we land. Please notify the board that I may miss the brief this evening." Linda's mouth fell open. "Board? What board?" Naomi ended the call quietly, slid her phone back into her bag, and centered her attention on Ariel again. Carla approached hesitantly. "Ms. Brooks, do you want to move to a different seat? We can try to arrange space for you two." Naomi shook her head. "We're fine here. She just needs to rest." A small movement drew Naomi's gaze. The man from 3B, the one who had spoken earlier, leaned closer. "Ma'am, forgive me for asking, but was that the Eli from Brooks Tech, the KUO?" A woman across the aisle whispered, "Wait, Brooks, Naomi Brooks." "The founder," Naomi offered a modest nod. "Yes." A collective breath passed through the cabin, as if each passenger pieced together the weight of her composure. They realized she was not just a calm mother. She was a woman who had built something substantial, who carried authority without needing to parade it. Linda recoiled as though someone had dropped ice water down her spine. "No," she said under her breath. "That's impossible. Dylan looked at Naomi with a new awareness, the kind that breaks illusions people build around themselves. Naomi continued tending to Ariel, wiping a remaining tear from her cheek. "It's all right," she whispered to her daughter. "People can be cruel when they carry hurt they don't understand." Ariel looked up. Why did she do it? Naomi placed a gentle kiss on her daughter's temple. Because some people forget how to be gentle with others when they're hurting inside. A murmur of agreement passed from one row to another. Linda's breathing grew loud and uneven. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "You're all making me the villain." No one replied. The passengers no longer believed the story she had tried to shape. They had witnessed the truth, and truth, once seen clearly, could not be folded back into the shadows Linda hoped to hide in. A quiet voice rose from the back. "I sent the recording to the flight attendants." A woman said, "In case they need it." Another man added, "I did too." Carla nodded gratefully. "Thank you. The captain will need all of this." Linda's voice cracked. "This is a conspiracy. You're all twisting what happened." But the more she spoke, the hollower her argument became. Naomi did not respond to her accusations. She focused instead on Ariel's comfort, rubbing small circles on her hand. Ariel whispered, "Mom, are the police coming?" Naomi nodded gently. "They'll speak to everyone, but you don't need to be afraid." "Will they be mad at me?" "No," Naomi said. "They will be proud of you for being brave." Ariel rested her head against Naomi's shoulder, trusting that answer entirely. The minutes stretched, carrying a new kind of quiet, not the silence of shock, not the silence of fear, a different quiet, the kind that settles when passengers collectively choose a side without being asked, the side of decency, the side of truth, the side of a mother and her child. Linda looked around, and for the first time, her confidence faltered. Her voice, once sharp enough to command a room, now cracked on its edges. "This can't ruin me," she whispered. "I've built everything myself." No one comforted her. No one validated her fear. No one told her what she wanted to hear. Naomi spoke then, her voice soft but carrying the weight of something unmistakable. "Actions define us," she said, still stroking Ariel's hair, "not the image we try to keep." Linda swallowed hard. Her gaze lowered. Naomi didn't look at her again. She didn't need to. The lesson had begun. The hum of the aircraft settled into a low, steady vibration. It filled the quiet like a background pulse, steady but not comforting. Naomi kept her arms around Ariel, offering warmth and presence. The child had finally begun to relax, though waves of discomfort still passed through her small frame. The surrounding passengers remained alert, a protective circle formed not by agreement, but by shared conscience. Naomi could feel people breathing slower now, grounding themselves after the swell of tension that had overtaken the cabin. Dylan shifted in his seat with restless energy. His knee bounced lightly as if he carried a confession he was afraid to release. He kept glancing at Naomi and Ariel, then away, then back again, as though he wanted forgiveness from people who owed him nothing. Linda sat rigidly, her hands gripping her handbag until her knuckles whitened. The sense of control she once projected had drained from her posture, leaving behind a frail outline of fear and denial. Another stretch of silence passed before a passenger from the middle rows stood. He was a black man in a tailored gray suit, his features composed with a kind of dignity that came from years of navigating conflict with steady discipline. He approached slowly, stopping beside Naomi's row. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm an attorney. My name is Warren Hale. If you need representation or any verbal support with the authorities upon landing, I'll stand with you. Naomi looked up, surprised but grateful. Thank you. Mr. Hale? That's kind of you. I have a niece around her age, he added, eyes drifting to Ariel with gentle concern. I couldn't just sit quietly. A whisper of appreciation spread through the surrounding seats. The cabin became warmer, not physically, but in spirit, as if human decency had decided to take up space again. Linda scoffed under her breath. Oh, wonderful. More theatrics. Warren turned toward her, his expression calm. This isn't theater. People witnessed what happened. You don't have to accept blame to acknowledge harm, but pretending innocence doesn't erase what we saw. Linda stiffened as if struck. I'm not discussing anything with strangers. You may have to discuss it with the police, Warren replied, the softness of his voice never wavering. Linda's gaze darted away. She looked toward the window instead, eyes unfocused. Carla approached from the galley with a clipboard. Her composure returned, though faint worry lingered in her voice. I need to document the event as much as possible. I'm so sorry for what happened. She stood beside Naomi and lowered her voice. Can I ask you a few questions? Naomi nodded. Carla knelt carefully to avoid blocking the aisle. When did the pain begin? Immediately after the contact. Yes, Naomi answered. She grabbed her stomach right away. It was a solid hit. Carla jotted it down. Did she lose breath for a moment? Yes. And any visible marks I'll check once she's comfortable. Carla nodded, her face stern with quiet resolve. When we land, medical staff will meet you first, before police begin their questioning. Linda shot upright. Police questioning. Oh, I didn't attack anyone. Several passengers exchanged looks. The disbelief in their eyes said more than any argument could. A voice rose from behind Linda's seat, soft but resolute. You did, said a middle-aged woman with silver hair and bright, serious eyes. I saw it. You extended your leg on purpose. You waited. Then you struck her when she tried to pass. Linda swung toward her, defensive and wild-eyed. You don't know what you saw. The woman did not back down. I'm a retired school principal. I've worked around children for 30 years. I know the difference between an accident and an act meant to harm. Her voice was steady, clear, irrefutable. The entire cabin seemed to lean into her words, recognizing the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime protecting children. Naomi watched quiet strength ripple outward, a reminder that truth could become a force when spoken by many. As the principal returned to her seat, Dylan suddenly stood. His motion startled Linda. Sit down, she hissed, her voice trembling. But Dylan didn't sit. His fingers brushed along the edge of his binder, the weight of his silence finally reaching its breaking point. I can't, he whispered. His eyes lifted toward Naomi. I'm sorry for staying quiet. I shouldn't have. The cabin stilled. Dylan swallowed hard, then looked directly at Linda. You've been losing control for weeks. You've yelled at clients, at staff, at everyone. And today, his voice cracked. You hurt a child. I can't pretend anymore. Linda sputtered. How dare you? But Dylan continued, a flood of truth spilling at last. She didn't stumble into you. She didn't lunge. You saw her coming and you blocked the aisle. You lifted your leg and kicked her. You called her troublesome. His voice softened with shame. And you always said things like that. You mock people, especially children, especially people who don't look like you. Shock washed across the rows. Naomi's expression remained calm, but a small flicker of sadness passed behind her eyes. Sadness that a young man felt so trapped that he needed a moment like this to free himself. Linda trembled. "Dylan, you're fired." A faint, almost relieved smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "I quit." He sat down again, exhaling for the first time like a man released from a cage. Passengers around him quietly applauded. Not loudly, not theatrically, just enough to acknowledge courage. Linda's skin paled. Her hands shook. She gripped the armrest as though the world had tilted beneath her feet. Naomi looked at her once, a steady, quiet gaze that spoke without anger. People choose who they become. Today, you chose wrong. She did not speak the words aloud. She didn't need to. Truth hung in the cabin, settled, undeniable. Ariel shifted slightly, opening her eyes. "Mom, what's happening?" Naomi kissed her forehead. "People are being honest, sweetheart." "Honest, yes," Naomi whispered. "And sometimes honesty helps the truth breathe." Ariel relaxed again, her trust in her mother stronger than any pain. Carla finished noting the testimonies from multiple passengers. Her stance straightened with new purpose. "Everything is being forwarded to the cockpit," she announced quietly. "The authorities will have full context when we arrive." Passengers nodded. Linda didn't speak. Her voice was trapped somewhere between disbelief and fear. She pressed her palms against her lap, shaking as the reality of the situation surrounded her like a tightening circle. Naomi brushed a strand of hair from Ariel's face. The storm had broken open, and truth had taken control of the aisle. Aaliyah had barely settled Isla against her side when the cabin lights shifted, signaling the crew to prepare the aisle. Something about the soft chime made everything grow sharper. Conversations thinned into whispers. Eyes touched the floor, then returned to watch the front of the aircraft. A tense, suspended quiet filled the space as if the plane itself stopped breathing. From the galley curtain, 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Their presence carried a gravity no announcement could soften. The passengers straightened almost at once. Aaliyah felt Isla tense, her small fingers clutching harder at the fabric of her mother's sleeve. Aaliyah lowered her hand, covering her daughter's knuckles gently, reminding her through touch alone that she was safe. Behind the officers came a senior security agent from the airport's response team. He scanned the cabin rapidly, his eyes moving from row to row with the calm of someone trained for the worst kinds of disruption. When he spotted the cluster of passengers gathered near Aaliyah's row, he approached without hesitation. The officer in front, a tall woman with silver threaded through her dark hair, stopped near them. She introduced herself as Officer Helena Turner. Her voice held the steady cadence of someone accustomed to chaotic scenes, and yet her tone softened slightly when she looked down at Isla. It was subtle, but enough for Aaliyah to feel something shift. This was a woman who understood the difference between authority used to control and authority used to restore order. Officer Turner addressed the group. She asked for clarity, her words deliberate, her gaze seeking facts rather than emotion. Aaliyah appreciated that. Emotion had already claimed too much space on this flight. Facts, she believed, would restore balance. Before Aaliyah could speak, Jason Hale stepped forward. The educator held his phone firmly but respectfully, offering to share the recording he had captured. He explained what he had seen the trip to the aisle, the sudden movement, the unmistakable strike delivered with intention. His voice did not waver, though Aaliyah could sense he was reliving the shock. Other passengers added their accounts. A woman from row 6, still shaken, described hearing the impact and seeing Isla bend forward in pain. A man who once served in the military explained how instinct overtook him when he witnessed a child harmed. He had stood up immediately, thinking the worst. Every word painted the same picture, a deliberate act, unprovoked, laced with anger that had nothing to do with an 8-year-old girl. Officer Turner listened carefully, jotting notes with swift strokes. Her partner, Officer Briggs, observed the passengers and occasionally asked for clarification. Their questions were precise. Their focus never drifted. Through all of it, Evelyn Granger sat rigid, eyes darting between the officers and the growing number of people speaking against her. Her breathing grew uneven. Every accusation pressed deeper into her composure. At first, she tried to interrupt, her voice rising, pleading innocence. She insisted she had been threatened. She claimed the child had stepped on her foot intentionally. She insisted she merely reacted. But the testimonies poured in like a tide she could not push back. When her voice turned brittle, Officer Turner held up a hand. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't show irritation. She simply stopped Evelyn with a calm firmness that told everyone she had no interest in arguments untethered from truth. "Now I'm going to speak with the mother," Officer Turner said. Aaliyah nodded slightly when addressed. She shifted closer to offer Isla's details without overwhelming her child. Isla's breath had steadied, though her body still leaned against her mother with a lingering tremor. The officer asked if Isla felt dizzy. Isla whispered no. Aaliyah added that her daughter had been struck squarely in the stomach, and while she was recovering, she needed to be monitored after landing. When Officer Turner asked whether medical personnel should board immediately, Aaliyah hesitated for a fraction of a moment. She looked at Isla first, searching her daughter's eyes. Isla shook her head gently. She just wanted to go home. Aaliyah relayed this with care, stating she would prefer an exam once they were safely off the aircraft. Officer Turner accepted that without resistance. Then came the moment Aaliyah knew would decide everything. She stood fully, her spine aligned as if she were stepping into a boardroom filled with competing voices. Her tone, though low, possessed a presence strong enough to quiet the closest rows. "I need to give a full statement," she said, "and I will. But before anything else, I need you to know that what happened here was not only an act of physical aggression, it was rooted in something deeper. My daughter did nothing to provoke that reaction, yet she was treated as though her existence was an offense. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a pattern, one my community has carried for generations." The air shifted again. Some passengers bowed their heads. Others looked at Aaliyah with a seriousness that conveyed respect. Officer Turner nodded. "I understand, and your statement will reflect all of it." From the corner of the row, a trembling voice rose. It was Mia Hale, the educator's sister. Her face flushed with a mix of anger and fear. She said they had flown many times, and she had never witnessed such cruelty. She said Isla had stood quietly the entire flight. She said she would never forget the sound she heard the moment the girl was hit. Her voice quavered on that last word, as though the memory itself shook her. The officers gathered every detail. When the questioning paused, Officer Briggs stepped toward Evelyn. He asked her to stand. The entire cabin felt the weight of what would follow. Evelyn obeyed reluctantly, her hands tightening around the handle of her expensive purse as though it were the last anchor to her collapsing control. Officer Turner recited the preliminary steps of detainment. Evelyn sputtered in disbelief. She repeated her earlier claims, her voice rising, repeating phrases about misunderstanding and overreaction. But she faltered when the steady gaze of the officers met her frantic attempts to explain away the harm she had caused. She appealed to the passengers, searching for anyone who might support her version of events. No one spoke. Even the elderly couple who had remained quiet throughout the flight looked at her with a disappointment so heavy that Evelyn shrank inward. Officer Turner's voice, calm as ever, delivered the final words. "You are being removed from the aircraft for further evaluation of this incident. You will have an opportunity to provide your statement. Right now, this child's safety and the safety of everyone on board is our priority." The cabin held a profound stillness. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't satisfaction. It was a recognition that something necessary was taking place, a measure of accountability, witnessed by all. As Evelyn was escorted forward, she glanced back not at the officers, not at the passengers. She looked directly at Aaliyah as if searching for something, perhaps anger she could challenge, perhaps weakness she could exploit. But Aaliyah's expression held none of that, only a quiet, steady strength, something Evelyn had no defense against. When the officers disappeared through the doorway with her, the silence deepened until Isla gently tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "is it over?" Aaliyah exhaled slowly, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. "Not yet, sweetheart. But we're closer." A sense of collective exhale moved through the cabin, as though every person believed that maybe, just maybe, healing could begin from this point forward. The aircraft door opened with a metallic sigh that traveled through the cabin like a release of held breath. Cool air from the jet bridge drifted inside, carrying the faint echo of distant announcements and footsteps. Passengers remained seated as instructed, but almost every gaze followed the movement near the front. Officer Turner guided Evelyn Granger ahead, her grip steady yet respectful, the way a seasoned professional handled someone spiraling between denial and fear. Evelyn's heels clicked in uneven rhythm, betraying nerves she could no longer restrain. Each step seemed to pull her farther from the world she once believed obeyed her whims. Aaliyah kept her focus on Isla, adjusting the child's blanket and whispering a few calming words. Isla nodded softly, leaning into her mother's shoulder. Her breathing, though steadier, still carried faint traces of the shock she had endured. When medical staff stepped aboard, their crisp uniforms and calm expressions brought a gentle clarity to the tense atmosphere. Aaliyah greeted them with quiet gratitude. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind eyes named Liana Price, knelt beside Isla, asking if she could check her abdomen. Isla responded with a small nod, her fingers gripping her mother's hand for reassurance. The exam was done with careful hands. Liana pressed gently at intervals, watching Isla's reactions closely. The child winced once, causing Aaliyah to tense instinctively, but the paramedic offered a warm, reassuring smile. "There's tenderness," she explained. "Nothing alarming right now, but she'll need rest. And observation once you leave the airport." Aaliyah thanked her. Isla managed a faint smile, comforted by the softness in the woman's tone. Once the paramedics completed their report, they stepped aside, allowing the officers and passengers space to prepare for disembarkation. The cabin slowly regained its sense of ordinary rhythm, though the tension had not fully dissolved. It hung there, muted but present, like a low haze after a storm. Passengers began collecting their belongings. Voices murmured between rows, sharing the weight of what they had witnessed. A few glanced toward Aaliyah with compassion. Some offered nods of respect. Aaliyah responded politely, but her core focus remained on guiding her daughter safely off the plane. As the crowd formed a slow-moving line down the aisle, Jason Hale lingered nearby. He approached Aaliyah with an earnest look. "If you need anything during this process," he said, My sister and I are staying at the same terminal for a transfer. We can wait with you or follow behind. Whatever makes you feel more supported." Aaliyah paused. She studied his expression, searching for sincerity. She found it there, unmistakable. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Jason nodded once before stepping aside to allow her passage. At the jet bridge, a pair of airport representatives waited. They guided Aaliyah gently toward a quieter section of the terminal where security personnel had blocked off space for statements. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle. A few officers typed on tablets while others gathered information from witnesses. Officer Turner reappeared, now without Evelyn. Her face carried a composed seriousness, though Aaliyah sensed a deeper empathy beneath it. "Before we begin," she said to Aaliyah, "is your daughter comfortable staying in your lap while we complete the statement? We can provide a private room if you'd prefer." Aaliyah smoothed Isla's hair. "She's fine with me." Officer Turner took a seat across from her. She spoke with a balanced calm. "I want you to walk me through everything you remember. Not just the moment of impact. All of it. Anything that led up to it. Anything you feel may have influenced her actions." Aaliyah inhaled slowly. She began from the moment she entered the cabin, recalling Evelyn's sharp tone, the disapproving glance when they settled, the remark murmured under her breath. She described the walk toward the restroom and how Isla hesitated. She recounted Evelyn's deliberate decision extending her leg, blocking space she knew others needed, raising the possibility of harm long before the violence occurred. Each detail passed through Aaliyah's voice with control, but beneath the composed delivery lived currents of pain that no explanation could remove. Officer Turner listened without interrupting, her posture open yet attentive. Only when Aaliyah paused to steady Isla did she speak again. "I appreciate how clearly you're recounting this," she said. "It matters, not only for the record, for accountability." Nearby, Mia Hale whispered something to her brother as they waited to give their own statements. Her face held a lingering ache, the kind that stays with someone who has seen injustice they were powerless to stop. One by one, the passengers approached the officers. Their accounts aligned with uncanny consistency. None minimized what they observed. None softened Evelyn's actions. Their honesty formed a collective shield around Isla, reinforcing what the evidence already proved. Once Aaliyah completed her statement, Officer Turner leaned forward. "I need you to know," she said, "that you handled yourself with resilience many adults don't manage under this kind of pressure." Aaliyah lowered her gaze briefly. "I acted because I had to. For her. My daughter trusts me to keep her safe." "And you did," Officer Turner added. "You're not alone now. The system will take it from here." Aaliyah nodded with gratitude. Yet part of her wondered about the weight of those words. Systems, she knew, could protect, but they could also fail. She prayed this would be one of the moments where justice threaded itself correctly through the process. As the officers stepped away, allowing others to speak, Jason Hale approached with bottled water for Aaliyah and a small carton of juice for Isla. His gesture was simple, thoughtful, grounded. "Thank you again," Aaliyah said quietly. Jason gave a gentle smile. "I just did what anyone should have done. Unfortunately, not everyone does." His words hung in the space between them, stirring a small ache within Aaliyah. She understood the truth in that statement all too well. Minutes passed softly. Isla leaned into her mother's shoulder, fatigue finally pulling at her eyelids. Aaliyah shifted her arms to cradle her more comfortably. Jason and Mia stood nearby, offering quiet companionship without intruding. Then Officer Turner returned for one final update. "Ms. "Carter," she said, "your daughter will be free to leave after a brief medical evaluation at the terminal clinic. As for Ms. Granger, she's being processed for questioning. We will keep you informed on the next steps." Aaliyah nodded. Officer Turner's expression softened. "I hope your day forward from here is gentler than what you endured." Aaliyah managed a small smile. "And I hope the truth keeps its place." When the officer stepped away, Aaliyah held her daughter close. The weight of the ordeal lingered, but so did the strength she had found in herself, drawn forward by love and guided by a calm inner fire she had carried her whole life. It was not over, but they were moving toward something better. The hallway outside the statement room held a quieter kind of tension, the sort that settles once the hardest part has passed, but the weight of the moment still lingers. Aaliyah followed the airport medic toward the small clinic at the end of the terminal. Isla rested against her chest, drifting in and out of light sleep, her head tucked beneath her mother's chin. Inside the clinic, the gentle hum of machines created a subtle rhythm. A nurse named Teresa Shaw welcomed them with a calm presence. She moved carefully, speaking to Isla in a soft voice that felt like a warm blanket after a cold night. She checked Isla's abdomen again to ensure tenderness had not worsened since the earlier assessment. Isla winced at one point, gripping Aaliyah's hand more tightly. Aaliyah whispered encouragement, brushing her daughter's cheek gently until she relaxed again. Teresa finished her exam and looked up. "I don't see signs of internal injury. Rest will help. Warm compresses later, and watch her appetite. If she becomes nauseated or lethargic, bring her in immediately." Aaliyah exhaled quietly. "Thank you. Truly." Taras offered a sympathetic smile. "Kids are resilient, but harm like this shouldn't happen. I'm glad she has you." When they stepped back into the terminal, a new kind of silence met them. It felt thoughtful, almost reflective. Jason and Mia were still waiting nearby, their concern unmistakable. They approached slowly, as if unsure whether Aaliyah wanted company or space. "How is she doing?" Jason asked. "She'll heal," Aaliyah replied. "It will take a little time." Mia held her hands together, fidgeting before speaking. "I keep thinking about how fast everything changed. One moment we were settling in, and the next—" Her voice trailed off. Aaliyah nodded with understanding. Sudden cruelty always leaves an echo. They all stood still for a moment, letting the truth settle between them. The crowd of travelers moved around them with the normal impatience of a busy terminal, unaware of the story that had unfolded only a short distance away. Soon, Officer Turner approached again, her steps measured. She offered Aaliyah a brief nod of respect. "We're moving forward with an official report," she said. "Everything you and the other passengers provided has been documented. Ms. Granger is being questioned at our airport precinct. Her behavior raises serious concerns." Aaliyah absorbed the information quietly. What she felt was not victory. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was the steady, grounded knowledge that justice was beginning to take shape. Officer Turner continued, "Before you leave, I'd like your signature on a summary statement." And her voice softened a little. "If you need support resources, we can provide them. The airport partners with services that specialize in trauma responses for families." "I appreciate that," Aaliyah said. "I may reach out later." The officer nodded. "Take your time." Once the paperwork was done, Aaliyah returned to where Jason and Mia were waiting. The terminal lights cast a gentle glow on the polished floor, reflecting the subtle movement of passing travelers. Jason shifted slightly, unsure how to broach the question forming on his mind. Aaliyah noticed. "Say it," she encouraged. He smiled awkwardly. I just wanted to ask if you're planning to take legal action beyond this. You have every right to. And people like her shouldn't walk back into life without learning something meaningful. Aaliyah looked down at Isla, who was now more awake, blinking softly as she listened to the adult speak. Aaliyah understood Jason's intention. She also recognized the deeper question behind it. I don't want revenge, she said slowly, but accountability is necessary. And more than that, understanding. Real change requires seeing what caused the damage in the first place. Mia frowned gently. Change. You think she can. After what she did, Aaliyah paused for a long moment. I think some people have never been forced to confront themselves. They move through the world untouched by the consequences of their behavior. But when life stops them in their tracks, when everything they've hidden behind is stripped away, sometimes that's the first doorway to transformation. Jason considered her words thoughtfully. You're kinder than most. Not kinder, Aaliyah replied, just unwilling to let bitterness guide me. My daughter deserves a mother who chooses clarity over rage. Mia nodded slowly, her expression softening. That's powerful. A voice sounded from behind them. I couldn't help overhearing. It was a woman named Eleanor Price, an attorney who had been seated 2 rows behind them during the flight. She approached with a poised calmness, offering Aaliyah her business card. I specialize in civil rights cases, she said. I didn't want to overwhelm you earlier, but I can support you if you choose to pursue further action. And not all cases are about punishment. Some aim to reshape the person responsible. Aaliyah accepted the card with gratitude. I'll consider it. As Eleanor walked away, Aaliyah felt a subtle shift inside her. Something steady, something rooted in the belief that the harm her daughter endured would not be carried alone. A short distance away, airport security escorted a familiar figure through the far corridor. Even from afar, the rigid posture, the unsteady steps were unmistakable. Evelyn Granger. She held nothing of her earlier arrogance. Her shoulders curved inward, her face drawn tight with fear and disbelief. She glanced around as though searching for a lifeline in a place that offered none. When her eyes landed briefly on Aaliyah, something flickered there. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't defiance. It was the faintest trace of recognition, as if she finally saw the full weight of her actions reflected back at her. For a moment, Aaliyah felt the pull of old anger. The image of Isla bending in pain rose uninvited. She steadied herself, placing a hand on her daughter's back. Isla looked up, sensing the tension. Mama Leah lowered to meet her at eye level. You're safe. That's what matters. Isla leaned into her, wrapping small arms around her neck. That simple touch dissolved the last sharp edge lingering inside Aaliyah. When she stood again, Evelyn was gone from sight. Jason glanced at her, noticing the thoughtful expression crossing her features. You okay? I will be, she said. We will be. The group walked toward the exit together. Not hurried, not anxious, just moving forward with a steady pace that carried the quiet dignity of people who chose strength over fear. Outside, the air felt broader, opening into a space untouched by the tension inside the terminal. Aaliyah lifted Isla gently, settling her against her hip. Her daughter's small hand rested on her shoulder, relaxed. For the first time since the incident, Aaliyah felt her own breath deepen, steadying her center. They had survived the chaos, and now they were stepping into the next part of their journey, one that would require reflection, decisions, and the steady heart she had cultivated through every challenge of her life. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The path forward would not be shaped by fear. It would be shaped by intention. The ride home should have felt like a return to normal life. Yet Aaliyah sensed every detail more vividly. The distant hum of passing cars. The soft shifting of Isla beside her in the back seat of the rideshare. Even the gentle sound of the driver adjusting the radio seemed sharper, as if the world was reminding her that she was still here, still whole, still capable of holding her daughter through anything that came their way. Isla rested her cheek against Aaliyah's arm. Her breathing was steady, though a faint heaviness lingered in her eyes. The child had always been sensitive to emotional shifts. She sensed things adults often ignored. Aaliyah wondered how much her daughter would remember, and how deeply the experience had carved into her sense of safety. When they reached their home, Aaliyah paid the driver and carried Isla inside. She eased her daughter onto the couch, fetched a warm compress, and placed it gently over the tender spot on her abdomen. Isla let out a soft sigh, relaxing beneath her mother's comforting presence. "Mom, why did she hurt me?" The question came quietly, not filled with fear anymore, but with the raw honesty of a child seeking reason in a world that often lacked it. Aaliyah sat beside her, brushing curls away from her face. Some people carry things they never learned to heal. Sometimes they hurt others because they don't understand how to handle their own pain. Isla looked thoughtful. "Is that why she yelled so much?" "Yes," Aaliyah replied. "But it doesn't excuse what she did. It only explains it a little." Isla leaned closer. "Am I safe now?" Aaliyah placed a hand over her daughter's. "Completely." They stayed like that until Isla drifted into a quiet nap. Aaliyah watched her chest rise and fall, feeling both heavy and grateful. There was pain in what had happened, but there was also resilience. They stood inside the hardest part and came out on the other side. Later that same evening, after settling Isla in her room, with soft lighting and familiar toys arranged neatly around her, Aaliyah sat at the dining table. Her laptop glowed in the dim light as she sifted through a flood of messages. People from her company had reached out. Her executive team had sent concerned notes. A few colleagues wrote long emails expressing outrage and support, but one message stood out. It was from Eleanor Price, the civil rights attorney who had given her a business card in the airport. The message was concise and respectful. Eleanor offered a time for them to speak, emphasizing that there were multiple paths forward depending on what Aaliyah wanted. Aaliyah stared at the screen for a long moment. She wasn't sure yet what she wanted. Her instinct leaned toward something that went beyond punishment. Justice mattered, but so did growth. She wondered whether Evelyn could grow, whether someone who had inflicted such harm could truly change, if given the chance. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was her colleague and longtime friend, Marcus Shaw, a calm presence in her life. She answered. "I heard about what happened," he said gently. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," she replied. "Isla's resting." And you, Aaliyah, hesitated. "I'm still sorting through what comes next." Marcus understood her tone immediately. "You're thinking bigger than a lawsuit, aren't you?" Aaliyah sighed quietly. "I want accountability, but I also want to understand what sits underneath her actions. She's not just angry. She's lost in something she's never learned to face." Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he said, "That's why you're the kind of leader people follow. You look at the whole picture, even when you're the one harmed." Aaliyah smiled faintly. "Thank you." Before ending the call, Marcus added, "Whatever you choose, you won't be doing it alone." After she hung up, she closed the laptop and walked to Isla's room. The child slept peacefully, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Aaliyah leaned against the doorframe, allowing the heaviness in her chest to soften. Moments like this reminded her why she chose compassion over retaliation. Every decision she made, every response she offered, shaped the world her daughter would grow up in. The following morning, she contacted Eleanor and scheduled a meeting for the afternoon. She prepared herself with slow breaths and quiet reflection, then drove to the attorney's office, a modest suite with warm lighting and plants arranged near the windows. Eleanor welcomed her with a handshake and an empathetic expression. "I'm glad you came. Let's talk about what you want, not what anyone expects." Aaliyah appreciated the directness. She took a seat, settling her hands in her lap. "I want to make sure she faces consequences, but I also want to explore whether this can be something more than a legal battle, something that forces her to face the truth of her actions." Eleanor nodded slowly. "That is possible. Difficult, but possible. It depends on her willingness to engage." "I want something that changes her," Aaliyah said quietly, "and protects others from the same harm." Eleanor leaned forward. "Then perhaps the most meaningful approach is a conditional settlement, one that mandates therapy, community engagement, and service centered around the people she alienates and undervalues. It would be intensive and monitored." Aaliyah listened closely. She felt the shape of an idea forming, something restorative, something challenging, something that could break cycles rather than feed them. "Can a person like her truly change?" she asked. Eleanor responded with thoughtful honesty. "People don't change because they're punished. They change because they're confronted with themselves, again and again, until they understand the cost of staying the same." Aaliyah considered the words carefully. They resonated with something deep inside her, something she had learned through years of leadership and the hard lessons of navigating a world that didn't always see her fully. "Then I want that route," she said. "If she refuses, we pursue everything the law allows. But if she accepts, then she learns." Eleanor smiled gently. "I'll draft the conditions." As Aaliyah left the office, she felt a quiet certainty settle into her. The path forward wasn't simple, but it was aligned with who she was. She believed in accountability, but she also believed in the potential for transformation, even in those who seemed unlikely to embrace it. When she returned home, Isla greeted her with a small, bright smile. She wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. Aaliyah held her close, feeling the weight of the past day melt into something warmer. "Are we okay now?" Isla asked. Aaliyah kissed the top of her head. "Yes, sweetheart, we're okay, and we're moving towards something better." In that moment, standing in the quiet comfort of her living room, she understood that healing was not an endpoint. It was a path, and she and her daughter were walking it together. A thin veil of late afternoon light filtered through the windows of Aaliyah's home office, settling softly over her desk. She had returned from Eleanor's firm with a folder of proposed conditions for the settlement. It lay open before her, its pages neat and sharp, waiting for her final approval. Yet she hadn't touched it for several minutes. Instead, she stood near the window, watching the neighborhood sway gently in a calm rhythm. Children played across the street. A man walked his dog past her driveway, greeting a neighbor with an easy wave. Life continued, unbothered by the heaviness she carried. Aaliyah folded her arms. The room was quiet, but inside her mind, two voices wrestled. One urged her to proceed cautiously. The other reminded her of the values she had worked her entire life to uphold: strength without cruelty, justice without vengeance, purpose without pride. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the room settle her thoughts. She wasn't seeking perfection from the decision she needed to make, only alignment, only clarity. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Isla standing in the doorway, wrapped in a cozy sweater, holding a drawing in her hand. Her expression was curious, gentle. "Mom, are you thinking too hard again?" Aaliyah chuckled softly. "Maybe a little." Isla walked to her and held up the drawing. It showed two figures holding hands, one small, one tall, both surrounded by a circle of stars. "This is us," Isla said quietly. "Because you keep me safe." Aaliyah felt her throat tighten. She knelt, pulling Isla onto a warm embrace. "You keep me strong, too, sweetheart." Ayla pulled back slightly. "Are you doing something for the lady who hurt me?" The question was soft, but filled with more awareness than most adults would have expected from a child her age. Aaliyah smoothed her daughter's hair. "I'm deciding what might help her see the truth, what might stop her from hurting other people." "Will it help her be better?" Aaliyah breathed deeply. "That's what I hope." Isla seemed satisfied. Then she hugged her mother again before skipping toward the living room, her steps light, her spirit already returning to its natural brightness. Once alone again, Aaliyah returned to the desk. Across the table lay her pen. She reached for it slowly, placing it on the first page of the settlement terms. Then her phone buzzed. The screen displayed a number she didn't recognize. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, but something nudged her to answer. "Hello." A hesitant voice came through, carrying weariness, humility, and something that resembled shame. "Ms. Carter, this is Officer Turner. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Aaliyah said. "Is everything all right?" The officer exhaled. "I thought you should know something before you finalize any decisions. Ms. Granger has been in a holding room for the last few hours. During questioning, she broke down. Completely. She admitted everything, not just the incident with your daughter. She spoke about her behavior toward others over the years, the anger she's carried, the prejudice she learned, the fear beneath it." Aaliyah felt a ripple of quiet surprise. Not disbelief, just a shift, a recognition that the story had opened another difficult, unexpected layer. "Is she cooperating?" Aaliyah asked calmly. "Yes," Officer Turner said. "She's overwhelmed, but she's answering every question." Her attorney requested a brief pause after she had a panic episode. "They're stabilizing her emotionally before continuing, but I thought you should know. This feels different from most cases I've handled." Aaliyah sat in silence for a moment, processing. She sensed no attempt at manipulation in the officer's voice, no embellishment, only earnestness. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I appreciate you telling me." After the call ended, she stayed seated for a long moment. The air felt thicker, filled with the weight of something fragile and complicated. Evelyn's remorse did not erase the harm she'd done, but it added a dimension Aaliyah knew she could not ignore. A knock sounded again. This time, it was Marcus. He had stopped by after work, concerned enough to make the short drive. "Isla let me in," he said gently. "How are you doing?" Aaliyah gestured toward the table. "I'm deciding whether to finalize this." Marcus walked closer, scanning the pages. "Community service, mandatory therapy, bias intervention training, restorative sessions, a full behavioral contract. This is intense, but fair." She nodded. "Eleanor did an excellent job." Marcus leaned against the back of a chair. "What's holding you back?" Aaliyah looked at him, eyes steady. "Officer Turner called a few minutes ago. Evelyn broke down during questioning. She admitted everything. She's unraveling." Marcus exhaled slowly. "That changes things." "Yes, but not the way most people think. It doesn't erase anything. It doesn't mean she shouldn't face consequences. But it tells me that maybe just maybe, she's ready to confront herself. Marcus folded his arms. I think you know what you want to do. You just need to say it out loud. Aaliyah rested her hands on the table. I want accountability that leads somewhere. Not a cycle of punishment. Not a loop of anger that teaches nothing. I want her to face the truth until she can't hide from it anymore. That's how a person rebuilds. Marcus smiled softly. Then trust your instincts. They've never led you wrong. Aaliyah turned back to the document. She held the pen again, this time without hesitation. With a gentle but firm stroke, she signed the page. Clarity settled in her chest like steady light. Marcus nodded approvingly. I'll drive you to Eleanor's office if you want. Thank you, but I can go. This is something I need to walk into on my own. Before he left, Marcus touched her shoulder with the gentle respect of a true friend. You handled this with more strength than most leaders I've met, and more compassion than many deserve. When the door closed behind him, Aaliyah let herself breathe fully again. The evening carried a calm weight. Thoughtful, deep. She stepped into Isla's room once more. Her daughter slept peacefully under the soft glow of a night lamp shaped like a moon. Aaliyah stood at the doorway, watching the slow rise and fall of her child's breathing. This was why she chose the harder path. Not for Evelyn, not for public perception, but for the world she wanted Isla to inherit. A world where justice could coexist with humanity, where accountability could open the door to change, where a child learned that strength was not loud, but steady, and that even when people break, they can be guided back toward the light. The next week unfolded with a quiet steadiness. Aaliyah returned to work, easing herself back into meetings and project reviews. But a soft undercurrent of reflection followed her everywhere. Even during the busiest hours, her thoughts drifted to the settlement she had signed and to the path it set in motion. On a calm Wednesday morning, Eleanor called with an update. Evelyn had agreed to the terms. Completely. No negotiation, no resistance. She had signed her portion of the agreement with trembling hands. Aaliyah listened carefully as Eleanor spoke, her voice stable yet carrying the weight of what had been set in motion. She accepted every condition, Eleanor said, and she asked to meet you. Only if you're willing. Aaliyah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the request settle. It didn't surprise her, but it reached a part of her she hadn't examined fully. The part that wanted to look the woman in the eyes, the one who hurt her daughter, and see whether the remorse was true. I'll meet her, Aaliyah replied softly, but only when it's structured. I want a counselor present. Of course, Eleanor said. I'll arrange everything. The meeting was set for the following afternoon at a private room inside a community mediation center. Aaliyah felt a steady hum in her chest as she prepared for it. Not fear, not anger, something deeper. A solemn recognition of the moment's significance. She brought Isla to school that morning before heading inside. Isla squeezed her mother's hand. You look thoughtful again, Isla said. Aaliyah smiled. Grown-up things, sweetheart. Will the lady be better now? Aaliyah brushed her thumb over her daughter's cheek. I hope so. I'm meeting her later. Isla's eyes widened slightly. Are you scared? No, Aaliyah answered, because I'm walking into that room knowing exactly who I am. Isla hugged her tightly, a gesture full of trust. Then she turned and hurried inside. That embrace carried Aaliyah through the rest of the day. When the meeting time came, Aaliyah entered the mediation center with calm steps. The hallway was lined with soft lighting and framed artwork, each piece chosen to evoke safety and reflection. She took slow breaths, grounding herself before entering the room. Inside, a licensed counselor named Dr. Rena Howard greeted her warmly. The woman's eyes were kind, her posture open. "Thank you for coming," Dr. Howard said. "I know today is not easy." Aaliyah nodded. "I'm ready." A moment passed before the door opened again. Evelyn stepped inside. She looked different than Aaliyah remembered. Not smaller, not fragile, just unguarded. Stripped of the harshness she had carried on the plane. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her movements hesitant. She clutched a tissue in one hand, though her grip suggested she wasn't using it to hide, but to steady herself. "Ms. Carter," Evelyn whispered, unable to lift her head fully. Aaliyah studied her for several seconds, not to judge, to understand, to see the full person standing before her. There was no anger rising inside her, no tension pulling at her muscles, only a quiet presence she had cultivated for years. Dr. Howard gestured for them to sit. Evelyn had trouble starting. Her breath came shallow, broken in small bursts. Aaliyah waited patiently. When Evelyn finally spoke, her voice trembled. "I need to say this without excuses. What I did to your daughter, it was cruel. It was wrong. And it came from a place inside me that I've ignored for most of my life." Aaliyah remained still, her expression steady. Evelyn continued. "I've lived in anger for a long time. Anger at my failures. Anger at myself, at changes in the world I never adapted to. But what I did to your child wasn't just anger. It was something uglier. And I see that now. I hurt her because I refused to look at myself, because I used my frustration as an excuse to punish people who never harmed me." Her voice cracked. "I can't believe I became that person." Aaliyah listened without interruption, hands folded gently in her lap. Dr. Howard spoke softly. "Take your time." Evelyn wiped her eyes. "I'm sorry, Ms. Carter. Truly. I know an apology can't undo what happened. I know it can't erase the fear I caused. But I mean it with everything in me. I'm sorry." For a moment, the room felt suspended, filled with a fragile sincerity that neither woman tried to rush or minimize. Aaliyah breathed in slowly before responding. "I appreciate your apology, and I hear the truth in it, but I need you to understand something. This isn't about me accepting your words. It's about what you choose to do next." Evelyn nodded quickly, as though clinging to the seriousness of Aaliyah's tone. Aaliyah continued, "The conditions in the agreement are not punishments. They're invitations to change, to look at yourself carefully, to face the parts of you that led to the pain you caused. The work ahead of you will be hard, harder than the legal consequences would have been. You'll have to confront beliefs you've carried for years. You'll have to show up consistently, even when you feel exposed." Evelyn's lips trembled. "I will. I don't want to go back to who I was." Aaliyah studied her face. She saw exhaustion, shame, but beneath it, something else. A faint but genuine desire to become different. "Good," Aaliyah said softly, "because real change doesn't happen in a courtroom. It happens in rooms like this, through honesty, through discomfort, through choices you make every single day." Evelyn lowered her gaze. "I want to do better. I want to earn the right to look people in the eye again." Aaliyah nodded. "Then begin with understanding that transformation isn't a moment. It's a process." A brief silence settled between them. A different kind of silence this time. Not heavy, not tense, simply human. Evelyn exhaled shakily. "Thank you for giving me this chance. You didn't have to." Aaliyah's voice softened. "My daughter deserves to live in a world where people learn from their mistakes. A world where harm can lead to healing, not just punishment. I chose this path because she's watching me, and because she will grow up understanding that strength is not about striking back. It's about choosing something better. Dakar. Howard's eyes glistened with quiet respect. Aaliyah stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Evelyn slowly rose as well, unsure whether she should offer her hand. Aaliyah made the choice for both of them. She extended her hand first. Evelyn accepted it with trembling fingers. "This doesn't erase the past," Aaliyah said gently, "but it can shape your future." Evelyn nodded, tears slipping down her face. After the meeting, Aaliyah stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. She took a slow breath, letting the crisp wind settle into her lungs. Something inside her felt lighter, not because the pain had vanished, but because she had chosen a path aligned with her values, a path that honored her daughter's future more than her own wounded pride. Later that evening, Isla curled beside her on the couch. Aaliyah wrapped an arm around her daughter as they watched a quiet film together. Isla rested her head on her mother's chest and whispered, "You feel calm today?" Aaliyah smiled. "I am, sweetheart." "Why?" "Because sometimes doing the right thing gives you peace, even when it's hard." Isla nestled closer, comforted by a truth she didn't fully understand yet, but would grow into with time. Aaliyah looked ahead, feeling a soft sense of certainty settle into her bones. Healing had begun, not only for her, not only for Isla, but perhaps for Evelyn too. The story of Aaliyah and Isla is more than just an act of violence. It opens up very real corners of life, contagious trauma, prejudice nurtured over years, and moments that force people to face themselves. The most valuable thing that the story brings is the reminder that strength lies not in responding, but in the ability to maintain one's good nature in the face of pain. Aaliyah, a successful black female CEO, could have let anger guide her. But she chose a different path, turning the incident into a lesson, turning pain into an opportunity to change a person. That requires inner strength, compassion, and steadfastness that not everyone has. In life, we will also encounter moments that make us want to react strongly. But sometimes, the harder but more correct the choice is to stop, look deeply into the cause, and guide others towards transformation. The story reminds us that hatred only breeds more hatred. Understanding and healing create lasting change. And true adults are those who know how to lead, not those who want to win. Hopefully this story gives you faith in kindness and the ability of people to become better. Thank you for taking the time to follow this emotional story. If the story touches you, please take a second to like the video. Share it with your friends and subscribe to the channel so we have the motivation to bring more meaningful content. Your support is what helps the channel continue to spread good values. Decisive. See you in the next stories.